Hey explainers, just a quick trigger warning here. We're going to be discussing true crime and the violent acts and individuals associated with it. So if that makes you uncomfortable, then feel free to skip this episode. Alright, on we go. Hello, my geeks and peeps. This is the sultry sound of Rebecca Parham, and welcome to another episode of Firebug Chats. I can't be too sure when this episode will premiere, but while I'm recording right now, it is the night before Halloween, and I am in the mood for something spooky and paranormal. And since it's been a long time since I made one of these Firebug Chats, and I have a plethora of different people in my life screaming at me to make more, I figured why not curl up, get cozy, and open up the conversation with you. I wanted to talk about a trip that I took to Las Vegas recently where I saw an attraction that really hasn't left my mind. As many of you may know, especially if you've been on the channel for a long time with me, one of my guilty pleasures is this ghost hunting show on the Travel Channel called Ghost Adventures, and it is hosted by a person named Zak Bagans. Now, speaking honestly, that show hasn't been a guilty pleasure of mine for a long time, because I haven't watched the show in many years. I just naturally fell off of it, stopped watching it, no real reason. But in the meantime, I have become a mega skeptic. I'm very interested in the science and logical reasonings of why we might see and hear things go bump in the night. And that's not to say that I don't still absolutely adore macabre and paranormal things. Like, I still love ghost stories. Halloween is still my favorite time of year. That will never change. I will always love the dark, spooky, creepy stuff. It just happens to be that I'm a skeptic in proving that ghosts are real. So why don't we just jump into the meat of this story. So I was in Las Vegas and I was looking for things to do, and I just happened to see an advertisement for Zak Bagans Haunted Museum. Now, I didn't look too deeply into what this place actually was. I just knew that it was a very atmospheric museum that he and his team had put together, and it featured his personal collection of macabre memorabilia. Now, when I bought the ticket, it was actually pretty interesting because they made me sign a whole bunch of different waivers, and that kind of adds to the hype. Like, it's basically saying, hey, you can't hold us responsible if a ghost causes you to faint or have a heart attack or die. Legally protects them, but also is part of the storytelling. Very clever, gotta admit. So I order a VIP ticket, or RIP, as they call it, and when I got there, one of the first rules that they tell you, and it's a very strict rule, is that you are not allowed to take pictures or record or anything, and that is why it is very hard to find video or pictures of what is in this museum. In fact, they told us to turn off our phones entirely. So yeah, basically I had no idea what I was getting into, and I was honestly expecting some haunted dolls, some cursed items, like the Ed and Lorraine Museum had that whole room full of cursed items. I was expecting stuff like that. And admittedly, there was a lot of that. Like, a very large portion of the collection was exactly that. For example, I don't know if anybody out there knows what the Dybbuk box is, but the Dybbuk box is supposed to be one of the most haunted items in the world, if not the most haunted, cursed item in the world. And it's kind of a big deal that Zak has this thing. And on the tour, they tell you this Post Malone story of when Post Malone was visiting Zak in the museum, and they were in the room with the Dybbuk box, and I think Zak took the plexiglass off the top of it, and he got possessed, and Post Malone was scared out of his mind. And then immediately after that incident, like, 3 really horrible things happened to Post Malone, like some accidents. He got, like, his house got broken into, he nearly died or something like that. And so he will go on to podcasts and say that he is cursed because of that incident at Zak Bagans Museum with the Dybbuk box. Actually, I want to share something that happened just as I was recording that last bit, and I recorded it and played it back. And just as the clip was ending about the Dybbuk box, I heard, like, a box getting knocked just immediately to my right. Like, I have some cardboard boxes out here, and I just heard like a big boom, like a tap on one of those boxes just out of nowhere, and there's nobody here with me. So that's funny. Like, I'm a skeptic. I know it probably was nothing, but it's kind of hilarious that I'm sitting here talking about the most haunted item in the world that I was in the same room with, and now, like, something weird has happened. Spooky, scary skeletons. Why don't we get back to the story now? Okay, so something that I was not prepared for about Zak Bagans Haunted Museum was that not only was there a lot of, like, fun paranormal artifacts and memorabilia, but I was a little caught off guard by how massive a collection he has of serial killer artifacts. And boy, isn't that just so topical right now. For those of you who are unaware, right now there is a very large discussion that is happening that is a hard look at true crime as a genre of entertainment and also the true crime community. And I have heard a laundry list of these complaints and concerns regarding the true crime community, and it's everything from insensitive online sleuths who are contacting the families of victims of cold murder cases so they can be the one to crack the cold case, all the way to a lot of people finding these serial killers attractive and hot and trying to justify why they did what they did. And as you can see, that's all very problematic. And there's so many other things regarding the true crime community that I could spend this whole podcast and more talking about, but we're gonna move on. And I just want to say a quick disclaimer here. I know for a fact that there are true crime enthusiasts that are not problematic, that they are very respectful, they don't cross boundaries, and they actually take a responsible perspective on the whole thing, on their own morbid curiosity, and they can think critically about it. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and say that anybody who has ever watched a serial killer documentary is a bad person. No, that is not the case. We all have morbid curiosity. It is human nature. We try to demystify the things that scare us so we are less scared of them. And it is important to have conversations about dark topics. But circling back to the topic of the Haunted Museum and its rather large collection of serial killer artifacts, I have to give my opinion on the fact that it felt very off that these things were laid out like shrines to these people, and that is where the problem is. Now, I know because a lot of you listening have your own morbid curiosity and you would like to know exactly what items were in this museum. I will name a few of the most noteworthy ones just so you understand context, but they had Ted Bundy's ski mask and the bag that he kept his tools in. They had art from John Wayne Gacy that he made in prison. They had a lot of his personal effects too. They had the personal effects of Charles Manson, and they also had Charles Manson's bone fragments, which the thing about this tour is that every single room you went into, Zak Bagans would come on the speaker and he would give a narration and talk about what exactly you were looking at and the story behind whatever it was you were looking at. And so when he got to the part where he was talking about Charles Manson's bone fragments, he made a point to kind of proudly proclaim that because he now owned the remains of Charles Manson, that technically means his museum is the final resting place of Charles Manson. And he said it as though you were supposed to go, ooh, ah, when he finished. And that felt weird. But apart from all of that, they also had Dr. Kevorkian's van, they had Ed Gein's shovel and cauldron that he used to do not great things. But the thing that I want to talk about is this one room that only the VIP people were allowed to go into. So at one point in this tour, the tour guide pulls aside all of the VIP people and says, all right, so only you guys are allowed access into this next room. However, I have to give you a trigger warning. Now, before you even get in this tour, before the tour even begins, you are given a mountain of trigger warnings because, of course, a lot of dark things are being talked about in a place like this, so you know what you're getting into. But the fact that she needed to give us an extra trigger warning about what we were about to see, well, I'll just say it was definitely called for in this circumstance, to the point where I debated with myself for about a minute if I actually wanted to go into that room and subject myself to that. However, my morbid curiosity got the better of me and I went inside. And what this room was an exhibit of Robert Burdella. And I don't know how many of you know who Robert Burdella was and what he did, but I can just give the details that torture was a huge part of what he did to people, and he took Polaroid pictures of his victims while they were being tortured. And apart from the other artifacts that were in the room that were pretty horrifying, what they decided to do was take the Polaroid photos that Robert Burdella took of his victims being tortured, blow them up really big, and make them the wallpaper for this room. And ever since I went and visited this museum and went into that room, I've had this mental image in my head of whoever was in charge of designing the exhibits for every single one of these rooms and just trying to get atmosphere right, trying to get theming right for every single one. That person walked into this empty room, looked around and said, okay, this is going to be the Robert Burdella room. I've got an idea. Why don't we take the Polaroids that he took of him torturing his innocent victims in so many horrifying ways, and let's blow them up really, really big, and we'll make them the wallpaper for this room. Yeah, that's gonna be it. That's gonna set the mood just right. It's gonna send a cold chill up everybody's spine. It's gonna make it really overwhelming to be in here. It's perfect storytelling. I'm a genius. And the irreverence of that's what sends a chill up my spine. The fact that the real suffering and pain that these individuals went through at the hands of a monster is being used as set dressing. And something about that turns my stomach and perpetuates an attitude that I think we need to step back and say, is this really what we want to do regarding serial killers and how we present information about serial killers to the public? And I guess that begs a further question that I've been stuck on ever since I left that museum. And that is, what would Robert Burdella's victims think of a room like that? What would they think of the photos that he took of them experiencing unspeakable torture and fear, being plastered all over the walls of this room that essentially acts as a shrine to their killer? I think it's pretty much agreed across the board that one of the biggest problems with modern day true crime fascination as a form of entertainment is that we are forgetting to humanize the victims. We are treating them as props that were used by the real star of the show, which is the serial killer. And this is coming from someone who, I used to be a true crime enthusiast, but I also used to be in the minority. Like, true crime as a genre, was not what it is today. Like 5 to 10 years ago, it was not what it is today. It's very mainstream these days. And I guess fandom does what fandom does, and eventually parts of it become toxic. And that's especially true for this true crime community. And that's particularly problematic because these are not fictional characters. These are not fictional circumstances where no one was actually hurt. These are real people who did real monstrous things to innocent victims. And we need to kind of check ourselves as people who are interested in the dark stuff, the creepy stuff, the more macabre. We do need to be able to step back and say, okay, where's the line drawn? And have we crossed it? And I think in many ways, yeah, we've crossed the line. And I understand that this is a very nuanced, complex conversation, and I am not trying to call out anyone in particular. I am not trying to call out Zak Bagans and his museum, because I think it is all too easy to fall prey to our own morbid curiosity, our own dark sensibilities, especially those of us who do find a lot of interest in the macabre. And as long as we are able to take a step back and take account of our own attitudes and the way that we are presenting this information and the story that we are telling, I think as long as we're able to course correct where it is necessary, then we're fine. And just because you lose sight of what's important for a moment, that doesn't make you a bad person, that just makes you human. So I know this is probably one of the darkest topics I have ever covered online, period. So thank you so much for curling up with me and having a conversation and having a very respectful conversation in the comments below. I'm sure you all will have. But if you don't want to talk about true crime, then let me know what you're doing for Halloween this year, because I love the spooky season. I've got my own plans. I'm going to reveal my costume online later. I'm super happy about it. It's not... I'm not a good cosplayer. I'm not good at doing the costume thing. I did my best, but I really love the character that I'm going as, and I hope you guys do too. You may have also already seen on my main channel, I covered Come Little Children from Hocus Pocus, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's available on iTunes and Spotify and lots of other different places. I also just dropped a new Witch of the Woods collection with my merchandise team. There is a cloak, a flannel shirt, scented candles, a brooch, really fun stuff that we haven't done before, and I'm super excited about it. It's all available for all of your holiday shopping if you want to drop a hint to a family member who doesn't know what to get you. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying your fall season, your Halloween, and I hope that your holiday season to come is just as wonderful. So thank you so much for tuning in, but now I gotta tune out. Bye! Little children, I'll take thee away into my forest of refuge. Come, little children, you're welcome to stay here.